My name is Mike Taylor, and I'm the Vice President of Americas here at C2C Systems. And thanks very much for joining us for today's webinar on managing personal archives for critical IT projects. I want to introduce Rich Turner, who's our VP of Strategic Marketing here at C2C Systems. He'll be today's presenter.
Good morning, or good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us. We'll be discussing managing personal archives for critical IT projects. Before we get started, I'd like to keep this a little interactive. So I would like to run a poll, and I'll give everybody a few minutes. The poll is basically what IT projects do you see personal archives or PSTs impacting? And it's multiple choice. Do you see these impacting VDI, bring your own desktop, migration, EDiscovery? If you could go ahead and vote, I'll close the poll in a couple of minutes, and we'll share with everybody what people's interests were.
In addition to polls today, folks, we want to just encourage you to ask questions during the course of the presentation via the questions tab that you see just below the poll on your right-hand ribbon. That can help us just gather some questions during the presentation today. And then we'll address those questions at the end after the conclusion of Rich's presentation.
Perfect. Let me close the poll, and I'll share it with everyone. Basically, if you look at this, 33% of you are interested in VDI, 50% bring your own desktop, 83% in email migration, and 50% in EDiscovery. So let's continue on with our presentation. Okay, today's agenda, we will look at, first of all, what are personal archives. We'll talk about problem projects, VDI and BYOD, migrations. Office 365 clearly is a big one, but it is even migrations in general. EDiscovery and eDisclosure. How do you address the problems? Also talk a bit about our own PST Enterprise product, and then finally have some questions and answers. I'd like to run another poll here. And basically in this poll, I'd like to ask folks, do you believe users within your organization need to understand the risks presented by PST files? I'll give everybody a couple of minutes here. All right, looks like we have everyone voting. Let me share this out. Very interesting. You see 71% of you don't think they need to understand what a PST file is, but almost 30% do. Again, very interesting and not dissimilar to what we see. Let's continue on with our presentation. Okay, when we talk about what are personal archives, obviously a lot of you folks know this already. That stands for Personal Storage Table. The intention is to be able to store email locally. They're available by default in Outlook 2003 and 7. Unfortunately, Auto Archive is enabled. And most organizations have these. The question comes up, why do you have a PST file to start with? They're useful. They overcome mailbox quotas. They provide long-term storage. They give you an easy way to move email between locations and people, particularly because they're not particularly secured and they're easily pulled off onto a disk. They're easy to use, they're highly portable, and they're widely used. Many organizations don't know how often and how many PSTs they have. They typically can have thousands. What we've found is there's generally 2 to 4 files per active mailbox. Each file might contain 10,000 messages or attachments, and there's about a gigabyte of data in each. So these quickly mount up. And frankly, as I think everybody on the webinar would agree, they're not really a good solution. First of all, they can be located anywhere. They can be on desktops, they can be on shared drives, they can be stored in your backups. You can have multiple copies of the same thing. They are under end user control, which is a huge problem. They're usually unmanaged. I know few end users who do a very good job managing PST files. I'm probably one of the biggest offenders. They contain business critical data. They're not secure, they're not often backed up, they can be lost and misplaced, and worse, that this file solution is very susceptible to corruption. I'd like to launch another poll. This will probably be our final poll. And basically, I'm asking here, what challenges, what are your drivers for trying to manage PST files? Are you looking to affect capacity, centralize information, eliminate unstable PSTs, eliminate risk in discovery and compliance, or permitting migration? So I'll give a few minutes for everybody to vote, and then I'll close that out. We'll take a look at that, and we'll dig into some of the various IT projects that we use PSTs and what you might want to do as a strategy to manage them. All right, looks like we've got votes here. Let me close the poll, and let me share out the results. And if you notice, it's pretty evenly split between capacity, centralizing information, getting rid of unstable files, but a little more concern about risk and migration. Here are some of the problem projects you can run into. Virtual desktop and bring your own device both have a similar problem, and that is that it isn't always possible or even desirable to store data locally. If it's a virtual desktop, of course, they're going to want the same environment regardless if they are. If they're bringing in their own device, do you really want them storing those files locally? So existing data is either going to need to be moved or it's going to be lost. If we look at one of our favorites, Office 365 migration. Obviously, you want to maximize the advantage of the cloud infrastructure, which means you need to consolidate existing data into your central location. We often find that an Office 365 migration may in fact be part of a virtual desktop interface or BYOD project. So guess what? You may be doing all of them simultaneously. Another big project, EDiscovery, or in the UK they call it eDisclosure, and legal hold. The challenge here, obviously, is you have to secure all relevant data, identify it, and that includes PST files. Attorneys are getting pretty smart, and they're asking for personal archives as well as what you have on your servers. The challenge is that everything also has to be collected, which means you have to collect this from these PST files. Now, Microsoft has come up with their own solution to this, which is called the InPlace archive. You find it in Exchange 2013 and in Office 365. The notion is to replace personal archives with the ability to take this one overarching archive and be able to tag it depending on what this data seems to be. Everything is managed centrally, and unlimited storage, of course I have to put that in quotes because right now the capacity may be significant, but when you look at any cloud vendor, they are going to charge you for capacity, and Microsoft will be no different. The other thing about the Microsoft solution is a very similar user experience. People are fairly comfortable with it. But there are other solutions. One of them is to keep PST files on centralized storage. That's to manage and back up data and to prevent users from creating them locally. There may be very good reasons to maintain PSTs. There are also third-party archiving solutions. We have Archive One, and there's other products available. The whole idea behind archiving is it's going to secure your storage for business-critical data. And the question might come up, okay, why would other solutions exist at all? Part of the reasons are fairly simple. It's really not advisable to keep all the PSTs for all the mailboxes. If you're using, say, the Microsoft solution, you are going to bloat your data storage like there's no tomorrow, and you're also going to introduce unnecessary legal and compliance risks. Basically, information that should have been gotten rid of is going to be re-ingested. And that's part of the problem with a PST, that there's no obvious notation, indication, whatever on that PST, that what it contains is very valuable, is somewhat valuable, or is simply wrong. Ideally, what you want to do is manage and eliminate the extraneous PSTs. And this is where these other solutions excel. They can be used once, they can be used on an ongoing basis. So if you look to implement one of these solutions to deal with PSTs, it's really a three-part process. You need to find them, you need to figure out what are you migrating them to, whether it's to an online archive, whether it's to Office 365, whether it's to centralized storage. The final thing you want to do is eliminate the original sources of those. Again, you're trying to put these files under control. You're either migrating them to ingest them, you're putting them into centralized storage, you're doing something with them. You want to get rid of that original PST. There's no reason for you to keep it around. Even if, for example, your project says, we are going to utilize PSTs as a way that remote users can get access to their PST data, but we want to control them. That's easily fixed. When you basically identify those PSTs, you move their location, you reattach the user. The user is still attached to the PST. They don't know there's been a change, but suddenly they're on your controlled drives. One of the challenges is locating PSTs. It's not simple. And basically, most IT departments know where to look, but the problem is how to look for them. Since a PST is a personal archive, the ostensible way to do it, unfortunately, is you have to sit at each terminal and open it up and figure out what the user has. This is a very lengthy process. This is why third-party tools exist to help. The notion of a third-party tool is it will go out there independent of the user and figure out just what they have. They'll also identify an owner for each file. The biggest challenge we see, or one of them in PSTs, are disconnected or orphaned files. Basically, a user can easily connect and disconnect a PST. It will affect the performance of Outlook sometimes. So they'll disconnect it, and then they'll forget about it, they'll lose it, or they'll forget the location, because a PST can be anywhere. Once that's done, it's going to become orphaned. It's going to start having its own life without an identifiable user. The problem is sometimes these orphaned files contain some pretty significant information. You may need to look at the file contents, and again, these could be orphaned. Migrating PST files is also a challenge, because ideally you should only migrate what you want to keep. When Microsoft turned on auto-archiving, it didn't have any intelligence to turn around and say, okay, this is a joke that was sent around to 16 of my friends, yet it's archived. This is something that has had no material value, but it's going to be in the PST. So you want to be able to delete unwanted files and delete old or unimportant data. If you're just going to migrate that and re-ingest it, then that's going to be living in your new system. So you've got a few options for migration. You can ask users to migrate them, and I think we all know how that works. You can use Microsoft's PST capture tool, and there are some issues there which we can talk about. Part of the problem with the PST capture tool is its automation features are limited. The other thing it doesn't do is it doesn't delete the original. Or you can use third-party tools. You can also manage the resource requirements when you're migrating PSTs, because it's no simple task to move a gigabyte of data across the network. This affects both bandwidth and it affects storage. If you're dealing with a migration to Office 365, you have both problems. First of all, you are going to have to re-ingest the PST into the user's inbox. That is going to take up disk space. You're going to need temporary disk storage for all of those re-ingested PSTs. Then you're going to need the bandwidth to migrate those from your on-premise solution to your in-the-cloud Microsoft Online Exchange. For those of you who've done these migrations before, you know that there are throttles built into Office 365 that are going to basically maintain the health of the system by preventing too much upload at any given time. In other words, the user requirements take precedence. So it could take you a few hours to migrate a very large PST file. We've seen that. Finally, eliminating PST files is very important. Once you've done something with this original file, you need to finish the job. Basically, either delete the existing files after they're migrated. This is going to avoid confusion, and it's going to regain storage. And finally, you need to prevent users from creating new files. It's very simple to change the settings in Outlook, which will prevent this. Once they're changed from an administrative level, there's no way the user can go around it and basically start creating them again. So once you've done this, you've made this change, you need to keep it from happening. If you're using PSTs on an ongoing basis, the situation I described before, which is actually a real live scenario where someone is using PSTs as a way to centralize data for their mobile workforce, we kind of thought an archive would be better, but people are more comfortable with the PST. They've still changed it such that whenever a user creates that PST, it's created under central storage. So it is not created on the user's own desktop. Let's talk a little bit about third-party tools. In our case, our product is called PST Enterprise, and it's our migration solution. Behind PST Enterprise, it'll locate files across the organization, and this is done blind to the end user. We don't need to know their logins, know their password. They just simply need to be on the network, and the tool will go out and find everything automatically. It'll migrate PST files to Office 365, to Exchange 2013, to a third-party archive, or to centralized storage or network locations. Probably most significantly, and I notice it's not on this slide, it'll delete them after the process is done. And that's a very important piece, because when you look at Microsoft's capture tool, it doesn't turn around and delete these files. So if you're moving a few thousand of these files, it can be very confusing. Great, they're all moved now. Which are the ones? Do I delete them all? Do I delete the ones I've moved? Ideally, this wants to be a process, that as you move them, then you get rid of them. Then you move them, then you get rid of them. You don't want to have to go back and try to do housekeeping afterwards. Let me finish out here. I want to talk about a case study that we have, which shows how PSTs can affect a business in a slightly different way than you might expect. A very large Canadian insurer, roughly 5,000 workers across North America, had basically not just consolidated, they acquired several companies. One of their challenges was obviously, now they have new companies, new exchanges, they needed to bring everybody into the same mailbox. The same, exchange, the same basically mail system. So what they needed to do is they needed to consolidate a large number of existing PST files. These were all remote users, to bring them into a central exchange environment but not interrupt their day-to-day operations. So what they did is they used PST Enterprise to locate all the PST files across the organization, automatically determine and assign an owner for each of these, since everyone was going to be getting a new email address. Copy or move the PST to the specified network locations. Again, they have a variety of offices and many remote users. And finally, ingest the PST files in place directly into Exchange. And basically what the insurance company found was the solution was simple. They leveraged its flexibility. They were able to create custom scripts that would adapt to their environment. And per the director of IT, that tool was the core to the integration process. Our product is based on SQL, so they could create such scripts and basically run batch-type processes. I'd like to open it up to questions now. And
great, thanks very much, Rich. So we'll just go through some questions. We have a number of questions from the audience out there. There are some simple ones, and there are some more complicated ones. We'll start with a couple of the easy ones first. How does your product compare to the free Microsoft tool? And I guess I'll give that one to you, Rich.
Okay, that's actually a good question. Microsoft has a free tool called PST Capture. They just came out with version 2.0, which eliminated one of the major problems earlier, that it only handled 1,000 users. It does have scheduling capabilities. It does some things. Some of the things it does not do, it doesn't manage orphan files, which is a big problem. More significantly, it doesn't keep track of what it's migrated or moved so you can delete them afterwards. There's no deletion capability in the Microsoft PST capture tool. That's probably one of the biggest problems we find.
Right, and that kind of dovetails into another question we have. Someone had asked, does your tool just go out and delete PST files? In other words, do I have to do something with them, like migrate them, or will our tool, PST Enterprise, just go out and delete them? And the answer to that is yes. If you wanted to implement a strategy to, for example, enforce your retention policy prior to moving any of the data around, you can simply use our PST Enterprise tool to go out and delete data that you viewed as extraneous, or as Rich referred to in the presentation, ROT, redundant, obsolete, and trivial data that's sometimes in environments, especially with legacy data in older organizations.
In fact, to that point, Mike, one of the things you can do with PST Enterprise is you can basically set automatic deletion based on date ranges. So you can very simply hive off all that data that you know. If you have a retention period and it's 2 years and there are PST files on there that are from 7 years ago, which happens, those can just be hived off before they're ever migrated.
Right. A couple more questions here from the audience, folks. One is, what is EDiscovery? We referred to this term during the course of Rich's presentation. And EDiscovery refers to really the discovery of data within an organization's, if you will, net, or within an organization's infrastructure that would be relevant for the purposes of either an internal investigation, an external investigation related to a lawsuit, perhaps a Freedom of Information Act request in a public entity. Really, we use the term broadly, but it just means the desire of some agency, either within or outside your organization, to find data within your infrastructure and your ability to produce that. Obviously, it's here in the United States and in Canada, as we get more and more litigious, as people begin to look more and more towards lawsuits as a way to make money and protect their investments and so forth, EDiscovery or eDisclosure comes up quite a bit in a number of different organizations. A couple more questions here. This is more of a sales question, so I'll take it. How do you see customers cost justifying their investment in your solution? So we see this one quite a bit from my perspective and my team's perspective on the sales and marketing side. Customers often will come to us and say, I have an option in PST Capture that is free. Why should I pay you X to do this job? And the answer is a couple-fold. One is our solution will scale to an enterprise-class customer's needs. As Rich mentioned, we'll do things like delete the PST after the ingestion, or allow you to delete the PST before it's ingested. Also, we allow you to have an audit trail, so you could have a record of what the product has done in terms of PST management. And then finally, the ability to do some scheduling. For a larger enterprise, we see scheduling as being very important, whether that's by Active Directory group, office number, or some other attribute that we can track that's relevant to your business. So those are some of the reasons why customers choose to invest in our solution rather than use the freeware from Microsoft. Next question is, how do you convince users to delete their PST data? Well, the answer to that one, I'll let you take that one.
Well, it's actually kind of funny, and it's a good question, and unfortunately you don't. But that's why the retention policies in PST Enterprise can be made automatic. So yeah, left to their own devices, they'll never delete anything. But if your corporate retention is 2 years, basically PST Enterprise will go in and remove that. Their obvious way around that is something is really important, then they should pull that out of email and put it somewhere where they're going to keep it. And most users are aware of that. What you find typically in PST files is you find an entire year's worth or 2 years or 3 years worth of archives, and it's just extraneous information. So if you go to the end user, no, they won't delete it. The best thing is to basically have a policy and make sure everybody knows, okay, this is going to occur. And if a user has a need for that information, they're going to raise their hands and they're going to say, hey, I need something different. And you can set that up. That can be a different retention schedule for that user.
Folks, that's all the questions we have today, and that takes us through the half an hour I think that we'd allocated for this call and this presentation today. If you have additional questions, feel free to go to our website, which is c2c.com, and either request a demo or post a sales inquiry there, and one of the members of our team will be happy to get back with you. And obviously, we're happy to just answer any questions you have in general following the presentation. A copy of this presentation has been made and will be available to those of you that want to share it with your colleagues, or perhaps view it again for follow-up. And obviously, if there's any other questions, Rich and I are happy to answer them. You can find us both at c2c.com. My email address is mike.taylor, that's Taylor, at c2c.com. And Rich's is rich.turner, that's rich.turner at c2c.com. Happy to answer any questions you might have. Thanks very much, everyone. Have a great day. And again, thanks for attending our presentation.
Yes, thank you.